are you all doing today? All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and happy welcome to a brand new chapter. You're going to really enjoy this one, I think. And by the way, this is the chapter where we talk about Sigmund Freud. Yes. In terms of, I'm going to potentially eviscerate, which you should enjoy quite a bit. Now, I will say, I'm going to give him some credit at some point, so be prepared. There are a couple of things he did right. So a couple of quick announcements for you. Don't forget that your Choose Your Own Adventure books are due on Monday. If you are having trouble getting it in on time, and I hope you're not, if you're having trouble getting it in on time, shoot me an email or come and talk to me after class and we'll see what we can do. So on Monday, what I am going to do is I am going to put up, for those of you that worked with the group, there's going to be a form where you can fill out your ratings of your fellow group members. Because remember, for those of you that are working in a group, 20% of your project is basically how well you worked in a group. Now, if you're a little nervous, don't be. Most of the time, it's not an issue, but occasionally I will have issues where somebody who's working in a group is kind of slacking off a little bit. You get this fantastic project and it turns out somebody didn't really do their fair share in whatever way that means. And so these ratings can kind of help me figure that out in case it turns into a, well, this person said I didn't do anything, but I did all of this. Like usually the other group members will be like, yeah, this person really didn't do all that much. It's only 20% of your grade. So be aware, if you slacked off a little bit, it's only going to take off so much. Do not panic about this project. For most of you, it is going to give your grade a boost. The lowest grade I have ever given on this project is a B. So you will be fine. No quiz this week. You just had an exam. Enjoy yourself. Take a break. Is anybody going to Hanging of the Greens? Who's going to the early session? I will see you there. I am going to buy a dress for Hanging of the Greens this weekend because it's fun for professors to go to. All right, so we are starting a new section and I did put the notes up in e-learning, so you should be good to go. We are talking about personality. How many of you are interested in things like personality? Cool. How many of you do things like astrology or how many of you are familiar with the Enneagram? I'm a 4. I know, you're shocked. Actually, you might actually be kind of surprised by that because somebody who's a 4 is usually kind of a, I'm an artist, I'm suffering. I'm what they call a self-preservation 4. I generally hide the fact that I'm suffering, and at least right now, I'm not really suffering. How many of you remember these things? Yes.
Questions.
Yeah.
And maybe I just don't have the right calendar.
Yeah.
On a syllabus, it's chapter 12, but it's social psychology.
Yeah, we're a week behind.
We're a week behind.
We're a week behind. We should be, so if you go in the syllabus, so part of the problem is we're a little bit behind and I do want to cover this, so.
No, that's fine. I'm just a little confused.
Oh, no, it's fine. So remember that the schedule is tentative. And so do remember that in general, I know, and part of what it comes down to is some of y'all really like to write everything you see on a slide. And I'm not going to be like, no, you must take shorthand on slides, but it does kind of slow us down sometimes. And I don't really care. I want to meet y'all where you are. So let's go ahead and take a look at that syllabus. Oh, wait, it's in lecture notes and course documents. Because personality actually should have been on the last unit and on the last test, but I didn't feel like kind of being cursory with it. So we'll go ahead and take a look. But yeah, that's why I put the word tentative, because sometimes we fall behind. And so, yep. Personality, we should have talked about that last week.
Okay.
So we're a week behind, so I'm still going to talk about it. We should have enough time to cover both social psychology and psych disorders, but we are a week behind.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and here's the other thing. I always put tentative. These dates may be subject to change. And I want to make sure that we cover this. I basically put out 2 weeks for social psych and for psychological disorders so that we would have, in case we had to have a little wiggle room, we could do that. But yeah, if I'm a week behind, like there may be some things I skip, but I do want to cover this even if we're a little bit behind. Like go talk to my research method students. We're about 2 weeks behind in that class. So I'm getting ready to be like, hey, y'all, you don't have to do the chapter on regression. Honestly, it's okay. They don't need regression until graduate school anyway. It's fine. I just like to cover it so they get some exposure. So it's okay if we're a little behind. I am the captain of the class and I decide what we cover. Okay, how many of you remember these from Facebook? I once got tagged as the lazy one and I got really indignant. I am like, I am anything but lazy. And the person was like, I was being sarcastic. I'm like, I can't tell. When you're, a tag cannot be a sarcastic tag. So how many of you relate to these? So what sort of things do you think about your personality? Like if you had to sum up your personality in one word, what would it be? Anybody? Huh? Unpredictable. Unpredictable. Okay. I'm pretty sure mine would be enthusiasm. Would that be correct? I have a lot of energy and it still doesn't come from caffeine. Although I did have my first cup of coffee in a couple of weeks. And it was very good and I did not get sick. So I'm very happy. Okay, so personality is basically defined as a characteristic pattern of thinking, feeling, and acting. So we know that people tend to be a certain way. So for example, I'm going to have a lot of energy. Chelsea is always going to have something that she wants to show me or tell me, like a cool video that she saw or an article she saw. Reagan's going to have a lot of extra questions about some of the content that we talk about. Like, the more that I get to know you, the more I get to know about some of the different personality traits that really make you you. And you get to learn more about me. So if I come in one day and I'm like this, hey, everybody, I'm really upset about something and I want you to know. And I'm just going to sit here and yell at you all day. You'll know that something's not right. There's no bubble. There's no bounce. And so we have these characteristic patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting. So we have the 7 dwarfs. Grumpy is usually going to be grumpy. That's why he's called grumpy. Happy is usually going to be happy. Doc is the smart one and the leader. Dopey is the clown. Sneezy sneezes a lot, although sneezing a lot doesn't really strike me as a personality trait. So we don't really actually know that much about Sneezy or Sleepy for that matter. Sleepy's probably a little lazy too. I mean, if you sleep a lot when you're working in a mine, you're probably going to feel a little lazy. But here's the thing. You and I are not just confined to one personality trait. There is, ooh, I haven't heard that ringtone in a long time. Is that a Samsung ringtone?
I'm doing it.
But most of us do not just have one personality trait. So when you watch cartoons, for example, like when I was growing up, I used to watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and it was really easy to tell who was who. Michelangelo liked to have fun and party, and Leonardo was the leader, and he was super serious, and Donatello was the smart one who made all the machines, and Raphael was like a snark machine. I did not like Raphael much when when I was a kid, but now that I'm older, I appreciate him so much more. He was so snarky. It was amazing. But most of us are not one-dimensional people. We have a lot of different facets to ourselves. And so when we talk about personality, it's important to know that we're not just defined just by one thing. So we're going to talk about a few different perspectives to view personality. So here's how we're going to kind of talk about this. So the first couple of perspectives that we're going to look at are all about how personality develops. So it's not about describing who you are, it's about how you got that personality in the first place. And the psychoanalytic perspective and the humanistic perspective are a couple of different ways to talk about those. Next, we're going to talk about how to describe the different types of personalities that we see. And this is what we're going to talk about, things like the trait perspective. And then we're going to finish up by talking about one of the major debates that we have. Personality is a stable thing, but you and I behave differently in different types of situations. If a tornado is coming and we're having a tornado drill, am I going to be bubbly and bouncy? No. But what does that say about my personality that I don't behave the same way in all situations? So we're going to talk about Albert Bandura's social cognitive perspective as well. But we're going to start by talking about Freud. So for any of you that are freshmen and are thinking about going on the Vienna trip, I am seriously considering designing a module to go to the Sigmund Freud Museum in Vienna. And I have to remind myself if I do that, not to throw things. I'm pretty sure I would get in trouble with the law if I did that. That's a museum, and museums are wonderful places. And I've actually heard there's a really good neuroanatomy exhibit there. So I really want to go. But we're going to start by talking about Freud's theories of how personality develops. So I want to remind you, Sigmund Freud was not a clinician. He is not a psychologist. He is a physician. And in drugs and behavior, my drugs and behavior students actually discovered he was a pretty big proponent of cocaine. He thought it was really beneficial and was a good way to kind of help people with things like alcohol addiction. He actually wrote a book called Über Coca, or a little treatise all about cocaine. And of course, when I found out about this in undergrad, I was like, why should I listen to Freud? Freud was a crackhead. Let's be very clear though. A lot of different people in the 1900s were using cocaine. Coca-Cola used to contain cocaine, to give you a little bit of a lift. That's why they call it Coca-Cola, because it comes from the cocaine comes from the coca plant. So a lot of his theories are based on clinical experiences. And they're based on things like, so a lot of his experience, he would have patients that would come in with idiopathic symptoms. They would have a lot of bodily issues, but people wouldn't know exactly why they were having those issues. So they would lose sensation in one of their limbs. They would start reporting pain or weird bodily sensations, and there was no cause to it. So Freud believed that part of the reason that this happens is that you and I have a lot of unconscious drives that we are not necessarily aware of. And this includes things like sexuality. And yes, Freud believed that you had sexual urges even early on in childhood, and you have these unconscious motivations that are sometimes socially inappropriate. And because of that, you are going to try to bury them in your unconscious. As a result, this will create a lot of tension. So think about water running through a pipe. What happens if the water pressure builds within that pipe? It's going to burst, right? So the idea is you have all of this unconscious tension running through your psyche, and like too much water pressure building into a pipe, these unconscious drives and motivations end up basically bursting and seeping through a lot of your different behaviors. So the psychoanalytic perspective is not just a theory of how personality develops, it is also an approach to therapy. So here's the idea. Nothing that you say, according to psychoanalysis, is an accident. Nothing that you say is accidental. So if you come in and I'm your therapist and you go, yeah, I'm having a really hard time with my suite mates lately. Folks, I don't know about you, but I have a lot of problems, like more than one, and I'm sure you do too. I do not have 99 problems, but I have quite a few problems. Most of us do. Freud says that you could have started with anything to lead in with. But the fact that you chose the issue with your suite mates first means that it's important to you. You could have picked anything. You picked that. That becomes meaningful in and of itself. So because of that, we are going to try to dive deeper into the issues with your suite mates and find what unconscious tensions are lying underneath the problem. And the idea behind this is that if we can expose those unconscious tensions, if we can make you aware of them, awareness is ultimately the key that sets your psyche free. I didn't necessarily mean for that to rhyme, but it really sounded good. So the idea is that by becoming aware of these unconscious tensions, you free yourself from their power over you. Once you're aware of them, you can be free of them and have catharsis. And so oftentimes this would kind of happen with you laying down on a couch and basically just spilling your guts in front of a therapist. And again, what you choose to talk about first is meaningful. You could have picked anything, but you picked that. As a result, we are going to assume that it's purposeful. Does anybody need some more time here? Jules, I love your rainbow whale on your laptop.
Thank you.
She has a whale that is in rainbow colors and I love it. I bought a narwhal pin at World Market with a rainbow horn. I'll have to wear it one of these days. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Freud's model of the psyche. So Freud believed that much of what we process every day is unconscious. This means it is not in our awareness. And folks, I'm going to give Freud some credit. I know, shocking, right? But I'm going to. So here's the thing. Much of what we do in our daily life, we are not consciously aware of. So folks, here's an example. I want you to think about your last birthday. Okay, so you weren't thinking about it a minute ago, right? It wasn't in your awareness, but once I prompt you to, it's suddenly there. How many of you have had instances where something happens and you have this immediate reaction to it and you don't know where it came from? Like a knee-jerk reaction, like immediate defensiveness, and you don't know why it's there? It's because you are processing something in your unconscious. Most of the time, we are not aware of the different processes that are going on in our mind. Much more of what is in our mind is unconscious than conscious. So our unconscious mind is basically, when you look at an iceberg, it looks pretty large, but as many of you know, an iceberg has far, far more ice below the surface. Such is Freud's idea of the mind. A good portion of our mind and of our mental processes are not aware they're not something that we can be aware of. And that's where most of our processing is. Now, we do have some that are pre-conscious, and that's much like the example that I gave you with your birthday. You didn't have it in your conscious awareness, but you can access it at any time and become aware of it. And then finally, the very tip of the iceberg is our conscious mind. Very little of what we do, we are consciously aware of. So we're consciously aware of some things, but not most things. Folks, thank you so much for being here today. We only have a few more weeks in the semester, and I shall go to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee for Christmas. We're staying in an Airbnb cabin. I'm so excited. I hope you have wonderful holiday plans too. Maybe good presents at least.
Oh, for Christmas?
Yeah, or the
Okay.
holidays. Not everybody celebrates Christmas.
Right. And others.
Yule. Some people celebrate the winter solstice. I am not one of them, but I know that Yule exists. So the psychoanalytic perspective is based on this concept of free association. This is kind of what I was talking about before. You basically say whatever comes into your mind. And the idea is whatever you say first is important to you. And we need to figure out why you brought that up first. So the idea is to take unconscious thoughts and memories and expose them so that you can free yourself of this unconscious tension. One of the other things that you need to know is that, as I talked about before, these unconscious tensions run through you and your mind, much like water runs through a pipe. If too much tension is there, the pipe will burst and unconscious motives will start to seep into your ordinary behavior. So that'll include things like jokes. Freud believed that there are no jokes, there's only truth. So if you're playing a game and you're being really sarcastic with your friend and you're like, I hate you. Like Freud's gonna say, no, you really hate that person. You're just hiding it with your sarcasm or things like that. We talked about Freudian slips before. So if I say be back in a sex rather than be back in a sec, that implies that, well, I was probably thinking about sex. And then again, from chapter 2, talking about dreams. So according to Freud, when we have a dream, there is the actual content of the dream, which we call our manifest content. And then we have the underlying meaning, the latent content. So if you dream of being in a big city with lots of tall skyscrapers, that's the manifest content. The latent content is going to be that Freud would say that you're thinking about a lot of phallic symbols. Like anything that is tall and pointy, according to Freud, is a phallic symbol. And then the idea is that by retrieving these unconscious motives, these unconscious memories, you can release yourself from them. Everybody good? Okay. So here you can actually see the couch that Freud actually used for free association. So when y'all get the idea that therapy is somebody laying on a couch, talking about how they feel about things, particularly their mother, it's because of things like Freud. I can tell you this, I've been to quite a few different therapists. None of them have ever made me lay on a couch and think about my mom. Okay, so let's get back to the idea that our psyche is made up of conscious, unconscious, and preconscious. So what you're looking at here are the different components of our psyche. So remember that psychoanalysis is not just a mode of therapy, it's a way to explain how our personality develops. So we're going to talk about 3 different components of the psyche according to Freud: the id, the ego, and the superego. How many of you are at least a little familiar with those concepts or have at least heard of them? Okay, so your personality, according to Freud, basically comes from this major psychic conflict that you will have going on throughout your entire life. You are always going to have a conflict between your id and your superego. And it's through this conflict that you develop your ego, which is basically your personality. So let's talk a little bit about each of these components. So what you're kind of seeing is that in general, your id is unconscious. And folks, according to Freud, you are born with your id. Now think about when you're an infant. What sort of things does an infant want? It wants to be fed. It wants to be changed. It wants attention. Now, as an infant, what do you do when you don't get what you want? You cry. And guess what happens? When you're an infant and you cry, for the most part, if you've got responsive parents, they're going to come right away and help your needs get met. So one of the things that's kind of interesting about the id is that it's selfish. The id wants what it wants exactly when it wants it. It wants it at that moment. It does not know how to delay gratification. It doesn't know how to wait. It's basically Veruca Salt going, I want an Oompa Loompa, Daddy. I want it now. So here's the thing. When you're a baby, you can get most things exactly when you want them. But as you get older, you learn, to quote the Rolling Stones, you can't always get what you want. As a child, you start to learn that, first of all, some of the things that your id wants you to do are inappropriate. So, for example, when you're about 3 or 4 and you go to the store with your parents, you can't just suddenly take your pants off and just swing them around in the air. Now, sometimes kids want to do that. Sometimes kids want to throw things. Sometimes kids want to throw temper tantrums or do really inappropriate things. And through parenting practices and through starting to take part in society, we learn that many of the things that our id wants us to do are really inappropriate. Freud said that the id is basically driven by 2 different things: eros, basically sex, and thanatos, or death. Your id is basically driven by sex or death wishes. And so because of that, a lot of the things that your id wants you to do are really inappropriate. And it runs up against what society or your parents tell you to do. So from the internalized ideals of society, we get the superego. Now, I know that I have a picture of Jiminy Cricket here. How many of you have seen Pinocchio? Jiminy Cricket's pretty nice for a conscience, right? Your superego, while being your conscience, is not as nice as Jiminy Cricket. So here's the thing. If you go against the wishes of the superego, these internalized societal ideals, your superego is going to punish you by shame. Dr. Gilchrist has a very overactive superego. I feel shame for, I am very easily shamed. I am probably, how many of you are kind of harder on yourself than anybody else? Yeah, you might have an overactive superego too. It's okay, you are not alone. But your ego is going to become, superego is going to become really, really punishing. So you have this conflict between your id that wants to do all of the things that you know are inappropriate to express, like yelling at your coworkers or throwing things at people. Your superego is going to tell you, you can't do that. And it's going to shame you if you go against it. So they're always going to be in conflict. The things that your id wants you to do are always going to be in conflict with your superego. So out of this, and the superego can be unconscious. It can also be preconscious or even conscious. Your id is largely unconscious, but your ego, what we would consider your personality, basically develops out of this conflict. Your ego is going to try to get the needs of your id met in a socially appropriate way. Maybe you can't throw things at your coworkers, but maybe you can send your boss an email and let them know that there is something going on with your coworkers that is frustrating you. Or you could actually talk to your coworker. Try to resolve the conflict on your own. So the ego is all about getting the needs of the id met in a socially appropriate way that keeps the superego from punishing you. And it can also distort reality so that you can function in the world better. So we are going to talk about some of the different ego defense mechanisms, the way that your mind tries to distort reality to help you cope. Pretty cool, huh? So yeah, I don't know, like obviously none of this is scientifically testable. I would argue it's more philosophical than anything else, but it's fun to think about. Okay, so ego defense mechanisms are basically things that your ego does to help with this psychic conflict and reduce anxiety. So Freud said that one of the biggest ways that we try to distort reality is by repressing things. So I don't know about you, but I'm not totally for the idea of repression. A lot of traumatic things that happen to us are more likely to be remembered than forgotten. That's why PTSD is a problem. These are people who have been through trauma and they can't forget, even though it would greatly benefit them to do so. But repression is one thing. So for those who may not know, when I was a kid, I was pretty badly bullied. I'm a little socially awkward, I'm neurodivergent, and that means that I approach things differently than other people. And sometimes that made me a target. And sometimes people really weren't very nice, and adults didn't really do a very good job of protecting me. Rather, they kind of blamed me, and that made it hard too. But one of the things that's actually kind of interesting is that even though I remember some things from around the time that the bullying happened, I don't remember much. And I don't know if it's necessarily because I repressed things, but I can definitely see that those time periods are a bit fuzzier than some of the other memories that I have. And maybe you have experienced this as well. Maybe your memories for a harder time in your life are a bit more difficult to recall, or they're hazy in a way that other things are not. Some other types of ego defense mechanisms that we do besides repression is regression. So maybe you haven't experienced this yet, but sometimes when I go home and visit my family, or if I hang out with my sister, and especially if I'm hanging out with them for a little too long, we start kind of acting like we acted when we were teenagers and getting into silly fights that we would never get into as middle-aged adults. Like and maybe you haven't experienced that yet, But you're going to find when you go home, especially as you get older and spend time with your family, you're going to get the sense that you kind of feel like a kid again or a teenager again, and you might start to act out against your parents, despite the fact that you're a grown adult. So that's regression. How many of you also maybe have a tic or a habit that kind of comforts you, like maybe sucking a thumb or biting your nails or things like that, or holding on to a blanket? Sometimes when we're having a really hard time, we might regress to some of those childhood behaviors that kind of gave us a sense of comfort. Reaction formation. How many of you have watched Hey Arnold? Okay, how many of you know Helga? How does Helga act towards Arnold in public? She's a bully. She is a bully, but what's she like in private? She loves him. She loves him. She writes poetry to him. She is a shrine to him. That's kind of creepy. But Helga Pataki is one of the best examples of reaction formation. You have something that you don't wish to express. So what you do is you basically behave in the opposite way. So the person that you act really hateful towards is the person that you really care for the most. I would also say, be careful with this one. Sometimes people don't treat you well because they like you. Sometimes they're just not nice people. Like the idea that somebody hits you or treats you poorly because they like you is a terrible, terrible idea. Projection. How many of you, does anybody here speed? Okay, Chloe, I'm going to pick on you for a second. You know that speeding's illegal, right?
Yeah.
Why do you do it? You gotta sometimes, but you don't gotta. Seriously, why do you do it? Because everybody else does it, right?
I mean, yeah, I'm a
Okay.
driver,
So I bring this up. So when people speed, you know it's not right. You know you're technically breaking the law, but oftentimes we will justify it by everybody does it. It's like, if I'm a liar, oh, everybody's a liar. So one of the things that we kind of find is for people that are doing something inappropriate or hurtful, they may try to justify their reasons for doing it because everybody else does it too. So a really common example of this is that sometimes people who are being unfaithful to their partners might start to get really paranoid and wonder if their partner is cheating when they are engaging in the same behavior. They can't really bring it confront themselves with the idea that they're hurting their partner. So they make it easier on themselves and go, oh, well, if I'm cheating, my partner must be cheating too. Everybody cheats. So that's what projection is. You basically project your behavior onto somebody else. So occasionally it's happened where I've confronted somebody with certain things and I've said, look, you're really hypercritical. You don't know how to take criticism. You're not always very nice and you're really condescending. And their justification is, I'm only condescending because you're condescending. Because you're really critical. They can't even face their own behavior. So they've got to basically mirror it back to you and say, I'm only doing this because you're doing the exact same thing to me, when that's not really the problem we were talking about, was it? Rationalization. This is basically when you try to explain away any bad behavior that you have. So rationalization, it's almost like you try to intellectualize your way through the problem. Yeah, I cheated on my partner, but monogamy is really overrated anyway. That sort of thing. Displacement. Have any of you ever been frustrated with a professor? Have any of you ever been frustrated with me? And it's okay if you have. Like sometimes things can be frustrating. I'm not a perfect person. Sometimes I will disappoint you. Sometimes I will let you down. I don't mean to, but if I do and you let me know, I will apologize for it. But let's say you're frustrated with somebody in authority. Now, can you vent and yell at them and be like, I can't believe you didn't take my grade? No, but odds are pretty good that with that frustration, if you're not careful, you're going to go and turn that around on somebody who's safer. somebody who's not going to leave you. So sometimes this happens with me. I get frustrated with work. I get frustrated with people who are more powerful than me, and I can't really vent my anger to them. So guess what happens? Unfortunately, my partner gets to take the brunt of it sometimes, and I'm not always very nice. So this is what is referred to as displacement. We displace our emotion or our frustration or our anger onto somebody who is safer. So sometimes this has even happened with me and the dog. If I'm having a really bad day and I can't really express my emotions to the person who's actually causing my frustration, I might get really frustrated with Smedley. I may be like, dude, quit sniffing everything. Stop it. You don't have to sniff every stop sign that you walk by. So displacement, we basically take that frustration and we move it to a safer target. Like, that dog's not going to remember that I kind of snapped at him. By the way, the famous example is the boss yells at you and then you go home and kick your cat. Don't kick or hurt your pets. Just because they don't remember it doesn't mean it's not nice, or doesn't mean it's nice. It's not nice. Don't do it. And then finally, denial. I don't have a problem. There's not any problem here. Basically, acting like you don't have a problem at all. So these are just some of the ways that our mind tries to distort our reality to protect our ego. Because sometimes admitting the truth that we can be hurtful to people, or that sometimes we can be frustrating with people, that can be a door to shame. And when you're dealing with shame, I think that talking about your shame, a la Brené Brown, is very, very helpful. She's got a new book coming out very soon called Atlas of the Heart, and I'm so excited. I love all of her stuff. Brené Brown, she wrote Daring Greatly, Rising Strong, things like that. I love them all. I have all of her books. Okay. So when we're talking about our unconscious desires and our motivations, you might be kind of curious as to how we can assess these. So we do what are called projective tests. So again, I'm going to give you an unclear or an ambiguous image, and I'm going to ask you to make up a story about it. So once again, it could be anything. These are going to be so ambiguous that it could be a lot of different things. And so the idea is that whatever you pick first is meaningful, and it tells us something about yourself. So does anybody know of any examples where you're given something that's kind of ambiguous or unclear, and you have to tell me what you think about it? Anybody know? Jules.
Would it be like those pictures that like in TV shows like therapists use where it's like a bunch of like splatter paint?
What do we call that, folks? Does anybody know? The inkblot test. Yes, very good. The inkblot test, the Rorschach inkblot test, is probably the granddaddy of all projective tests. Here's something really interesting. Up until very recently, if you wanted pictures from the inkblot test, you had to pay like a ridiculous amount of money to actually get access to the test. I think now you can actually find the images online for free. Do you know why? Because it doesn't really work very well. And we'll talk about why. But I'm going to show you a couple of these, and I want you to tell me what you see. So I actually pulled up some ink blots. We're going to talk about what we see. But first, we also have another one. So how many of you have seen this in TV where somebody is given an image and they have to kind of describe what they're seeing in a story? How many of you watched the show Daria? You should absolutely watch Daria. In the very opening episode, Daria is actually given a picture of a man and a woman talking, and she has to create a story. And so she basically goes, it's a herd of beautiful wild ponies running through the plains, because she really doesn't want to be there doing that test. So here, this is what is called the thematic apperception test, or TAT. So here's an image. Folks, can you tell me a story that is going on here? What do we think is happening here? There's no right answer. Just tell me what you see happening here. She just murdered her husband. How many of you thought of that? Okay, anybody else? What do we see what does somebody else see?
Husband just died.
Husband just died. How many of you got that? Yeah. Yeah, Meraki.
He looks drunk and she's just crying.
That's the one I think of. He had a long night of drinking and she just wants him to stop. Anybody else? So maybe we can only make so many stories with this one, but the idea is that whatever we pick is meaningful. So those of you that are thinking about murder and death, oh my, that would probably tell us something if I were a psychoanalyst, but I am not, thankfully. Okay, so this is the Rorschach inkblot test. This is probably the granddaddy of all projective tests. We basically identify our inner feelings by interpreting different blobs. They all look like orchids, wasps, and bats to me. Like this one that this kid's looking at here, that looks like a bat. But I'm going to pull up one that's a little more complicated, and I want you to tell me what you see in a minute. Yeah.
My first thought on the one on the left was just a really weird cow.
Okay. See, I see a wasp trying to land on a flower. See, there's its wings, there's its head, there's its big feet. Anybody else? It's okay if you see things like ovaries, by the way, that happens a lot.
Honestly, it kind of reminds me of a cross-sectional of body. Not anything specific, but I'm just,
Okay.
does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Now I'm kind of seeing a squirrel. Here's his eyes, or like a badger or something. I don't know. Okay, let's all talk about what we see in this one. Jules, do you need more time? Okay, what do we see here? I see man, bear, pig.
What did you say?
Man, bear, pig. It's a character from South Park. He's
Oh.
super serial. Super serial, you guys.
Some giant monster like
Sitting on
moving over a spaceship.
Okay, I see. So have any of y'all seen the movie Annihilation? Okay, I love that book. The movie's pretty good too, but there's like a bear that has part of a human skull in it. It's really creepy. It kind of reminds me of that. But the idea here is that this is all really subjective, isn't it? Everybody sees something different. Just now, I see two witches. Here are their eyes, here are their hats and their capes, standing on a bunch of rocks. And now that I've seen it and described it to you, you can see that too. And now you can't unsee it. So that really raises the question, are these actually your unconscious thoughts? And I would argue they are not. These can be influenced by a lot of different things. So if I talked about witches before I showed you this, some of you might be primed to think about witches when you otherwise wouldn't have done so. So one more slide and we'll call it a day. So remember back in chapter 8, we talked about the qualities of a good test, that it has to be reliable and it has to be valid. So remember that reliability is all about how consistent the scoring is, and validity is that it measures what it actually says it's going to measure. So it turns out projective tests are terrible at both of these. So projective tests are not reliable. So I want you to imagine that Lily and I are both psychoanalysts, and we basically give Lorena an inkblot test. And so based on Lorena's responses, Lily and I come to very different conclusions about what's going on inside. That is an unreliable metric. We have subjective ideas about what could be going on based on what she describes. And as a result, it's not consistent. It is also not valid. It is not a measure of your unconscious. So yeah, these are fun to talk about. They're fun to print and hang in your room and frame, but they're not actually assessing the unconscious. So we're going to go ahead and stop here. We will talk more about Freud on Monday. Enjoy your weekend. Do something nice for yourself. Take a break. We've only got a few weeks left. Thanks for sticking it out. I am so proud of you, and have a wonderful weekend.